Hello and welcome to this week's live stream. Thanks for joining me. Of course, as always, please pop in the chat, say hello, and let me know that you can hear me and see me. Bruce, yes, that is a Zelda scene. So if you read all of the description in my teasers or in my promos this week, you'll know, you'll have a bit of an idea what I'm doing. Today's going to be a real fun one. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I was just, the thing that was holding me up was actually finding the exact right reference photo, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Let's say hi to everyone who's joining in. Spastic, hello. BR, welcome. Sergen Dirt, good to see you again. Awesome. So, yeah, so what we're going to do today is we're going to be taking a cartoon character and painting it realistically. And there's a skill to that. It's a thing people do sometimes. It's more for fun. It's like, you might call it just fan art. It's not super practical in the sense that it's not something you necessarily will ever need to do for anybody, for a client. That would be pretty rare. But it might be something you might want to do if you're a real big fan of some cartoon or video game and you want to bring it to life and practice some painting skills. Because in the end, too, this is a painting exercise. It's an exercise in color theory and being resourceful and finding reference photos and trying to create drama and mood into a reference image that might not be as artistic or as inspiring as what you might want. Hey, Praveen. I hope the situation is all right over there. Yeah, you know, our country's kind of screwed, but, you know, we're personally doing fine. Hello, Michael. And so let me just go ahead and jump in and show you about this one piece of artwork that I've done. So yeah, I did basically one really good paint over or a repaint of a cartoon character. I'm a huge fan of the Venture Brothers. It was my favorite cartoon for years and years until Rick and Morty came along, and I still love both, of course. But this was a painting I did. I just wanted to see if I could do it, just as a challenge to myself, essentially, and bring Dr. Venture to life. So the original reference photo is here on the left. That's all I had to work with. And what I needed to do was figure out how to paint him realistically. And the key, I think, to this, after you figure out what your main reference is that you're going to copy, you know, the original cartoon source, is you have to find a real-world lighting reference. When you're going to paint realistically, as I like to do, or as I try to do, it needs to be based on something. I'm not very good at inventing really convincing lighting. I mean, I can maybe to a certain extent when it comes to maybe doing a little color study out of the imagination, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of where the light hits the face and where shadows fall, it's always good to have a realistic reference. So I searched and searched. I did Google searches, I think, for, you know, bald man. I don't know how I ended up finding it, but I found this painting, or sorry, this photo of actor Michael Chiklis. And he was my main reference source for the lighting, at least for the head. And you can probably see what's going on there. I really like the drama of this lighting. There's a strong light source, a primary light source. There's some reflected light. There's core shadow. And it's even at the right angle. So that was what I mainly used when trying to find the reference for the face. Now for the body, that's a different matter. Because he wears like these pink, different colored jumpsuits, or he calls them speed suits in the cartoon. He thinks they're really cool. And he's kind of stuck in the 60s and 70s. And so I looked at cosplay photos, because a lot of people cosplay as Dr. Venture, but I couldn't find the exact right pose and lighting that would match that. I ended up finding like an old, I don't know, a Sears catalog of someone wearing this exact type of outfit. And then but it was blue, so I did some color tweaking in Photoshop to make it pink. And I thought that would help me, but it wasn't really. I mean, again, it didn't have the right pose, the right angle. The body position's different, so I really needed to see the folds in the clothing and the shadows and all that. So again, that's fun to see, but it's not in the end extremely helpful. So what I end up usually doing most of the time is I just took a picture of myself trying to make the exact pose and the exact lighting that I wanted. So yeah, so I got the clothing. I did as best I could with the top. You know, I got a collared shirt that was buttoned down. And as you can see, I ended up translating a lot of those folds and wrinkles directly into this, but just making it pink. And my facial expression, I thought maybe I could help with the painting, but the painting of the face, but I ended up mostly just sticking with Michael Chiklis. So that was the process for doing this one, and I'm going to follow a similar process for what I'm going to be doing today. And what I'm going to be doing today, if you read, is actually Legend of Zelda. I'm a huge fan of the video game series, and I'm going to recreate this still from, it's one of the cinematic memory sequences from the game, from Breath of the Wild. And, you know, I go back, Legend of Zelda and me go way back. I got my shirt on here. And I've actually only played like 3 of the games. I played the original Nintendo Entertainment System, you know, back in the 80s. I played Twilight Princess and then Breath of the Wild. I missed all the games in the 90s pretty much because during that time I was in college and I was working and I didn't have video game consoles. So I never played Ocarina of Time or any of those. So. But I just when Breath of the Wild came out, I'm like, yes, I'm gonna play that, and I loved it. I'm a little obsessed actually. I mean, I don't decorate my room or anything like that, but I'm always watching Zelda videos. I even actually made a little piece of fan art to a little sculpture just because I had some time. Earlier this year, I made this little princess figure. This is one of the figures from the game, and she gives you these little heart containers. And I found this on Etsy. Now I made it look like it's floating in front of her. So I just made a little diorama. It goes on my fan art shelf that I have over here. Anyway, so I really, really enjoy Zelda. It's a fun story, fun video games. And so what I needed to do for this was I also decided I needed to redraw the image, because just like with the Dr. Venture, I changed the model just a bit to make him a little bit more human, a little bit more realistic. I mean, he was still basically just the cartoon design from the show, but for Zelda here, I wanted to take away some of the anime qualities and make her more realistic. So I ended up, first I did a tracing just to kind of get my bearings to see exactly what the proportions were, what it was like, what it felt like to redraw the exact same figure, and I realized what I wanted to change. So I gave her, you know, a realistic bigger nose, bigger mouth. I shrunk her eyes down. I think I shrunk her ears a little bit, and overall her head was too big for her body to project. Oh, I'm an idiot. I didn't show. Okay, maybe I'll cut that part out. I wasn't showing the drawing the entire time I was talking about that, was I? Yes. Anyway, yeah, so sorry I didn't, not always on the ball with these things. All these buttons. Anyway, on the left, again, just to reiterate, that's the original drawing that I did. And, I'm sorry, the original tracing of the model. Made her nose bigger, made her mouth bigger, made her eyes smaller, and I shrank the size of her head overall in relation to her body for this drawing on the right. And I wanted to get a, you know, more realistic appearance to her and not quite so cartoony and anime looking. So this is what I'm going to be painting today. All right, so we're all caught up. Yeah, so I'm real sorry about that, guys. Yeah. I wish these comments that you guys had would have little audio alerts, because I sometimes don't always look at them. Anyway, we're back on track. So I scoured the internet trying to find lighting reference, because the lighting in this is very inspirational. It's very cinematic, but it is still a cartoony light source. Everything's flatly lit. This is what's called cel shading. And it's, I guess that's a video game term when they take realistic shading and then reduce it down to just 2 values of light and dark to give it a animation cell quality. So I wanted to make it more realistic. I'm not going to go for photorealism in this because that's not really my thing anyway. I want to do a realistic portrait painting the way I might do it in oils. So I scoured the internet trying to find good reference photo for like women in certain lighting, like women up against a sunset background. And here's a real small one I found that was pretty good, that sort of reminded me of that. But it wasn't until I found, it was actually just a happy accident. My wife shared a video with me of this musician, Gary Newman. He had a new video. If you remember Gary Newman, he had a big hit in the 80s called Cars, but he's still out there making music and with his daughter now. And her name is Persia, and she's in the video with him. And so she is shown, you know, against this sunset backdrop. And it's almost perfect. She's blonde, it's almost the right angle, but it has enough for me to go off of. So this will be my main color reference for the face. So I want to keep this in view. And this one here is not, that was my first image I was maybe going to use, but I'm going to get rid of that just so I don't get too confused. So my two main images will be the image of Persia Newman and Zelda here. Okay, let me stop and take a look, make sure everything's all good here. Do I still play the game, Court? Shiny says no. I to play Breath of the Wild, I actually had to borrow a Wii U from my nephews and nieces, and I had to give it back. So I just gave them the game as well. So I never even actually played the DLC, but eventually I'll get a Switch. Whenever the new Breath of the Wild sequel comes out, I'll get a Switch, buy the original Breath of the Wild, play the DLC, and then play the sequel when it also comes out. Alrighty. Let's see if there's any questions before I move on here. Praveen asks, how can we draw a composition where two people are interacting physically, like hugging and shaking hands? It becomes difficult to make their hands or body interact. Okay, that's a really good suggestion. Maybe that'll be for a future stream. Anytime you guys have an idea for a stream or a question, please just write it here, or write it in the comments actually in the video after the video ends or below the video, because that's easier for me to find than scanning through the chat again. Yeah, so maybe that's something I'll tackle in a future video. Thank you for Praveen. All right. Anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and get going here on the painting. The first thing I want to do, though, I am gonna just start painting it, but what I want to do is create first a color study. And the color study is going to just develop naturally into the painting, but I'm going to save a copy of the painting in its raw state when I get all the colors in that I want, and I'm going to refer to that as well while I'm working. Because a lot of times what happens when I paint digitally, the painting eventually becomes kind of muddy, and because I'm selecting colors from all around the composition, and it loses some of its vibrancy. The color study is going to help me keep things vibrant, I think. So first I'm going to start with, let's just start with a tone over the entire canvas, just something really warm, bright, orangey. And let's just go ahead and just paint. The color study doesn't have to be very exact. It's not going to be a rendering. It's just going to be very blocky and simple. And I'm going to mostly use my color picker window here, which is behind my head, but I'm going to I'm just planning on staying down here in this range, like going to the greens, maybe a little bit for the blue in the shirt, but all the colors in the composition are going to be in the lower part of the hue rainbow here. Nothing's going to be cool, no purples, no blues. Everything's just going to be super, super warm. So I'm just going to keep that down here just because it's really the only place I can keep it out of the way. And just start blocking things in here. Let's see, Ukinam asks, hey Court, speaking of the Zelda landscapes in the beginning of the countdown, do you dabble in environments here and there? I don't do a lot of digital painting of environments, but I do a lot of actual landscape painting with oils out in the real world, which I think is extremely valuable. And that's a skill that definitely could translate over to painting, concept art environments. But yeah, I don't do it a lot, but I enjoy it whenever I get a chance to. I had a crazy idea of actually doing frame grabs from Legend of Zelda and painting landscape paintings from the video game. But I don't have the video game anymore, so I can't really go around and search for those landscapes. Because it is a beautiful game. There's a lot of... The thing about Breath of the Wild, it's the atmosphere. The landscapes are very nicely rendered, and there are games with higher, polygon counts and higher degrees of realism, like Red Dead Redemption and all that. But what Zelda does really well is capturing mood and atmosphere in the landscape. And that's what's really just compelling to me, I think. Like in the shot right here, it's very moody. It's like this great sunset image. There's a lot of haze. But anyway, when I do landscape paintings with oils, and I do a lot of sunset paintings actually. It's one of my favorite times to go out and paint the real world. You learn a lot about what wavelengths of light end up, making it, and how to do atmospheric effects, and Yeah, I mean that's just what I mean this is kind of what I love about landscape painting is this like moody light. I don't love blues and greens in a landscape. If I can paint at a time of day where there is no blues and greens, that makes me happy. Now as the landscape moves forward, there is a little bit more coolness in the landscape. It gets a little darker and a little warmer. I'm sorry, a little darker and a little cooler. Antonio asks, but with the principle of the form, you can predict the light on a character, or is reference always needed? Yeah, there's definitely people that are really good at predicting how light hits form, and you can definitely do it to a certain degree with more practice. Maybe I could too if I tried it. There's always things you'll find in a reference photo that you'll never think of. You'll never think about doing if you're just doing it from imagination and just doing your best guess. So I prefer to work from a reference photo that I might find whenever possible, because it's going to add that much more credence in reality. Because things will happen, like there'll be a weird shadow on the face that only happens in a photo, or a bend in the or fold in the clothing that might be a little bit awkward, but you can make it work. So yeah, definitely you can do it from imagination, but I think it's going to have all that much more visceral reality if you do it from life, or do it from a real reference photo that helps you with the lighting. Paul's asking, hey Court, can you tell us more about the brushes you use and what nibs you use in the Cintiq pen? I'm just using the standard nib that comes with the Cintiq pen right now, and I'm on my HD 22-inch Cintiq desktop model here. And the brushes are all custom made, and I am going to release them soon. I know I talk about this every week, but I'm just working on them still. There's a few brushes that I think are extraneous that I don't want to include in my set, but I'm trying to come up with a nice, tasty, compact brush set for doing traditional style paintings. And if you want to, I did a video for Proco that's on YouTube about how to make your own custom brushes. And I give an example of one particular type of brush in that video. So you may want to check that out. It's the how to paint digitally and make it look traditional, or something like that. See, that's a little too cool. And there's this great foreground color down here. It's really close to Miss Zelda. And let's go back out here to the sky. It's like this yellowish white that's almost pure white, but there's definitely still some yellow in it. But I like how the lightest light is right behind her head here. It really sets her off because she's the darkest thing in the composition. So your eye always goes right to the area of greatest contrast in a painting or photo. Some clouds up in the sky here. I'm not too concerned about making everything really, really specific here in the background, like this, the topography, because I am going to work on it later. I just want to get over all the main color statement down here. And I'm going to keep in mind that this is going to be my color guide for the painting, for the final painting. So I do want to pay, I don't want to just cruise through this without like any thought to, forms or details. But forms or details are not the most important thing to worry about right now. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it, comparing it up against the photo, and I think there's actually a little bit more, a little cooler, a little dark in this part of the middle ground. If there's breaks in the paint where it's not totally consistent, that's actually probably even better on a landscape, because those little inconsistencies can end up looking like just details from the topography. And this one gets just a little warmer. Okay. that's basically it for her, for the landscape, as far as all I want to do for that right now. How long does it take color studies? I'm trying to do color studies. I'm going to try to do this in about 15 minutes. I mean, I'm a little slower because I'm talking, but hopefully it won't take too long. But this is going to develop into the actual painting. Let's see. So I'm trying to both now look at my photo reference of the girl and Zelda from the screenshot, and maybe a cross between the two, because I think she's a little dark in the screen grab. There's going to be definitely more light hitting her face like in the reference photo. But I think it needs to be a little warmer, maybe a little redder. And maybe not quite dark enough. It needs to be a little darker, I think. Because we can always go lighter really easily. But if you go light too soon, the tendency is to stay light throughout the painting, and the painting will end up being a lighter value than I really intended. So I always err on the side of being a little bit darker initially. And maybe we can step it down another level of darkness. And it's okay to paint, that orange underneath everything, because overall this is a very, very warm value painting, warm temperature. Hossein says, should I concentrate on weird shadows since they give the subject more life and randomness, or correct but boring shadows? Shadows that is like you draw them from imagination, not what you see. If I understand what you're asking, should I give in to the temptation to paint weird shadows that I might see in the photo, or go with what maybe my instincts are telling me? A little bit of both. I'm going to judge what I see on the photo of Persia here, and apply that to the painting, but in a more simplified way. So, I don't know, it's a balanced approach, I hope. Okay, so let's block in her hair. It's going to have a little bit more yellowish green tint, and just a little bit. Actually, it's darker in value than her skin. So, oh, that's too green. Yeah, she has blonde hair in the game. It's sort of dark blonde, a little dusty blonde. Dirty blonde, I don't know whatever you might call it. I'm not sure if this green is gonna work. I mean, it kind of looks like what's in the photo, but it doesn't look like what's on Persia. So I might warm it up and make it more look like what it looks like in the shadow of Persia's neckline over here. The hair, which sort of like light, warm orangeness is coming through. So these are the critical decision-making steps where that's going to determine the outcome of the rest of the painting. So the most important thing is that the values are good. The colors are secondary. They're not unimportant, but I want to make sure the values read correctly first. And then the top of her hair is going to be this sort of more pale yellowish color, as opposed to the part that's up against her back, which is a little more reddish. Okay. Let's lighten up the face just a little bit. Okay, let's get the her tunic and her blue. It's sort of a teal colored tunic, but in this lighting it's gonna be very, very warm. But everything else is so orange in the painting that we don't need to go very cool at all, and it'll still read as blue. Like, yeah, so you can see, like, I'll bring this up here so we can actually see it. I'm picking from sort of around the yellowish green portion of the spectrum, and just down here where it's a little bit grayed out, maybe a little darker. And up against all these oranges, this is going to read as a cool blue. G asks, do I only use one layer? not one for the background and one for the character. Right now I'm just all in one layer. You can see here's my layers palette. I have it hidden. For the color study, it definitely doesn't matter. For the final portion of the painting, as I move into the more finished, I might... I mean, I have to move above the line art layer at some point. So yeah, I'll probably do a layer above this. But there will be all this underpainting still that I'll have to contend with. But I don't like working with multiple layers because it can get it gets confusing. You sometimes forget what layer you're working on. You're painting on the wrong layer for too long, and then you're kind of like, oh man. Then you have to do stuff to fix that. So I always try to reduce the number of layers I work on. Also because I like my process to mimic the process of working on a real painting. All right, so I want this collar to read as it's a white shirt, but it's definitely it looks more of a bluish green here, but up against everything else it'll read as white, hopefully. And she's technically in the shadows. So another thing to consider here, if you're thinking about the real world, if you painted a lot outdoors, you might realize this. If you ever paint facing into the sunset, the objects that are reflected back at you, like the surfaces of trees and mountains, are going to be lit by the cool lighting behind your back from the eastern sky where the sun isn't. So there might be more purples and blues bouncing back into the forms. And so I'm going to think about that as I'm painting her too, where she might have the lightest parts of her face, the parts that are lit by reflected light from the sky, is going to have a more cool tinge. And that's not something that you're going to see in a cel-shaded animation from a video game. It's just something, that I know as a painter that's what happens. So I'm going to keep that in mind. And it's not happening with Persia here because, it's from a video and there's probably not, it's a little earlier in the day. I think the sun's still up technically. And of course, it's all dependent on the environment as well. If she was standing and there was, behind my back from the vantage point that I'm at here, if there was a big rock face that was reflecting the sunlight, it would reflect a lot of orange and light reddish colors back into her face. But if there's nothing in front of her, then yeah, she might reflect more of what is in the sky. And, just because I'm a nerd and I remember the video game, at this particular place, she was up at this horse statue and there's a big valley in front of her and there's no like rock faces right next to her directly. So just if I'm going off of what I know from the video game locality, there maybe is going to be some more cooler blues. I mean, that's getting into the weeds a little bit and maybe I'm overthinking it, but when you're thinking about these little color decisions, sometimes you have to overthink it. So this tunic I think needs to get a little darker. It's definitely darker than the hair, and I could maybe, whoops, I am on the wrong layer here. I didn't want to cover up the drawing just yet. If I go a little closer to the black end of the spectrum, that will read as a little bit more blue. I'm not quite there yet with this tunic. I'm not feeling it. It's, I think it is too green. It definitely needs to go bluer if I want to be closer to what's in the photo, but not too blue because I don't want to break the atmosphere of what I've got going on. The consistency in the color. Yeah, that feels a little better, but it's a little too light still. I think it could be darker. By the way, I better save this as I'm going here. I know I always have rotten luck with these sometimes and they crash. Okay. Okay, I'm squinting down and it's looking pretty good. Needs some more work though. It's still not quite there as far as the as being an informative color study. So I'm going to look more now at Persia's photo, the girl, and try to get similar lighting to what's going on there. I like how the left side of the head is a little darker than the right, so there's going to be, this side's going to be more in shadows. I'm going to use that for my inspiration as well, because it's going to help make the head look a little bit more three-dimensional. And she even actually gets a little bit muddy and dark here on the far left side. Ooh, that's too yellow. G says, how do I know that this gray is going to read blue? I mean, it's just something you judge when you look at it, I guess. It's, I mean, it looks blue. It looks bluish green compared to the background, that's for sure. It's just, it's all relative. If you were to look at this color in isolation without anything else around it, it would be hard to tell what color you intended it to be. But it's like that meme that was popular a couple years ago, that the dress that was, is it, you know, black and gold? Is it blue and white? And it was just because it was taken in like indirect lighting, and of course it was a low quality photo as well. But yeah, the eye can be fooled, and half of color theory is just fooling the viewer's eye and using everything that's around the colors to make certain colors look like what they are or what you want them to be. It's a bit psychological. Yeah, thank you, Benito. That's kind of what I was saying. Just it's relative to what's around it. Okay, now here's the part where I'm going to let's make this just a little bit larger. I don't want to make my color study too large because I don't want to get focused on details, but I'm going to now work a little bit differently in the face here. I'm going to find some cools. So I'm going to go down the spectrum on the red spectrum, which is technically closer to blue, closer to purple, and find some colors that are just that read a little bit cooler. And this will be that fill light I was talking about, which might be coming from the ambient environment in front of her, like the blue or purple sky. And it's going to give the painting a little bit more interest, I think, so it won't all be so monochromatic. Overall, overwhelmingly, it's going to be warm, but I think having these little cool notes in here is really going to breathe some life into the painting. It's just, it can't be too contrasty because I don't want her to look shiny. I don't want her to look metallic. Okay, that's kind of the feeling I'm going for there. Now let's see, let's put some whites in her eyes, but not like real white. Just a slightly cooler color. Okay, and you know what? There's going to be some gold trim on her outfit here, and in the video game, this trim on her outfit always comes off looking as just like sort of a warm yellowish color. I don't know if it was their intention to make it look like shiny gold, but maybe that's just too hard to do in a cel-shaded game. So I am actually going to imagine it is supposed to be gold, like, you know, reflective gold. So I'm gonna keep that in mind as I'm doing this quick color study here. Which means basically I just want to have some just some intense gold highlights here and there. And you don't want to overdo it with the shininess of these things, otherwise they just look too obvious. I'm going for realism and subtlety here. But I'm just grabbing some colors from the background, some golds and yellows. There we go, something like that. And also put this down here in the under belt, has that same effect. Okay, there's a bit of rim lighting on her. What's wrong with being shiny? Haha, very funny, shiny. There's a really intense rim light all along her hair, which I think is going to be a fun effect to try to capture. So I'm going to go really, really bright with that. Let's see, let's grab, like, I don't know, something like a red. Something like that. It's also going to be over here on the far side. And also her ears are going to be a little bit translucent, so there's going to be some light shining through those. And then there are some very subtle light blue highlights. And again, I don't want to go too blue, but I think I do have to get out of that spectrum a little bit of that warmth just to make these read properly. So yeah, the edge of her outfit's catching just a bit of that rim lighting. Like so. Okay, I think that's about it for my color study here. Let's shrink this down so I can get a good look at everything here. And let's actually get rid of the... Oh, I didn't color her eyebrows. Not a big deal, but if I want to get rid of these outlines, I gotta put something in for her eyebrows, probably. Ooh, there we go. Oh, you know what would be good also to have in there that I don't have is my darkest black. And my darkest black is not going to be very dark at all. So I'll just take the darkest color that's in there, and which is this, and maybe go just a little bit less chromatic with it, but I don't want to go too far down that spectrum there. Because the thing that's going to sell this atmosphere is having it within a narrower range of values. When you're in lighting like this, the blacks just don't look black anymore. There we go. Alrighty. Yeah, so this is going to be my general color study here, and I'm going to now make a duplicate of this file. First I'll save it, and image, duplicate. And there we go. And I'm just going to keep this open the entire time, but I'll keep it really small. And this will be basically a third photo reference that I'm going to be working from. So I might actually sample colors directly from this as I'm working, but it's not like sampling colors from an actual photo. It's because I painted it. I made these choices to paint that. Let's see, I need to find some more room on my canvas here. Let's make Persia a little smaller. And so I can move this over. Okay, so now hopefully I can see everything here. So it's a balance of trying to find the right size for everything. Okay. Let's see if there's any questions here. Paul says, where would you recommend starting out learning about color theory? Any must-read books or online sources? I don't know if you caught my color theory live stream. It was a few weeks ago, but if you look back into my live stream videos, I did a whole thing on my approach to color theory. If you did watch that and you still need more information, there's a really good book, I think, by James Gurney called Light and Theory, or Color, Light and Theory, something along those lines. And he's really good with color theory as well. But I try to make it just as a simple approach as possible. So check out that live stream on color theory I did and see if that helps as a starting point. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and it's really hard to find just the most important aspects that you need to focus on, because it can be really complicated, but it doesn't need to be. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a layer right above what I was on here. So this is now I'm going to be painting with opaque paints. I'm going to start covering up my lines. And I'm going to focus on Zelda here. I'm going to leave the landscape, the background for now, and just focus on her. And, you know, I've got all these great colors here already, so I'm just going to sample from them and then just paint over these. I just want to get rid of the outlines. So it might mean I have to, like, you know, paint into the hairline a little bit with the color, and then I'll paint back over it with the hair color. And you just got to paint back and forth to cover up those lines, essentially. I mean, another approach would be just to get rid of my line art layer, but I'm not quite ready for that yet. I didn't resolve the color study enough to continue on with the painting without seeing the outlines. And this is usually how I work anyway. I think it's easier. It just, you know, I just gradually cover up the line art as the painting progresses. And by the end of the painting, the line art is just eventually gone. Benito says you can learn a lot by mixing paint itself. And yeah, that was sort of the main point of my color theory lesson, was that you kind of actually have to create this color wheel by mixing real oil paints or acrylics or whatever your medium is, because the actual physical act of mixing shows you so much about how to control your intention with the color. Your color mixing becomes an extension of your vision that you have inside your head. It's how it materializes. When you're working just digitally, you don't learn as much about mixing color, just because it's just a mechanical act of going over to a color picker and just saying, I want that one. You don't actually have to mix things. And by mixing things, you actually learn about the properties of color and how one color affects another, and how colors all inherently have their own value of light and dark. And it gets beaten into really intuitively on a very basic level how to work with color. So I always recommend, yeah, people, if you want to learn color good, paint with real materials, because there are consequences to choosing certain colors, and those consequences are what keep you honest, and what's really teaching you about the properties of color. the, the darks in the eyes are too dark. And that's because I think the outline layer was showing through. I'm going to lighten up these blacks. Maybe actually warm up the black a little bit too. So the darkest dark is probably going to be in the eye here, but again, it's not going to be a full value. It's going to be a lot lighter because I want to keep that atmospheric mood to the painting. And that's a little different for me. I tend to want to always paint with high contrast, with lots of darks, intense darks. But in a painting like this really forces me to think more atmospherically because I'm going for a mood and a cinematic quality, not so much realism. Color Fufuna asks, how do you still change the color while painting at the same time? Oh, well, I'm on a Windows PC. I'm using Photoshop, so I'm actually constantly toggling my paintbrush into a eyedropper tool. You see here, I just have one of my express keys set up to do that. So I'm sampling paint from one area of the painting, and then I immediately start painting with it. And I don't know if you can do that on iPad apps exactly. You might be able to. If someone is familiar with painting in Procreate or something, just let us know if you can do that. It's very, very intuitive. I'm just constantly doing it. My thumb is always on that button. It's never not on that button, just because it's part of my streamlined painting process. And if it's just on a keyboard, it's just usually the Alt key, or on a Windows, I think it's Option on a Mac, Option or whatever the other one, Command. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Mac keyboard shortcuts. But yeah, it's essential, I think, to being an efficient painter is being able to switch back and forth like that. I mean, you can't do that when you're painting digitally and when you're painting with oils, but when painting digitally, it's the main benefit to painting digitally, I think, is that quick transition from eyedropper tool to paintbrush. An iPad, you just use your finger. Okay, yeah, it's just a different, hold a finger on the canvas. Okay. Yeah, I guess you'd get used to that if you just do that more often. If that's just the way you learn to paint is on that program, then yeah, that would become, like, I guess, second nature. So I'm painting little areas around the eyes here, so I don't know if it's easy to tell what I'm doing, but I'm also trying to cover up those outlines, trying to make it not so outliney and cartoony looking. So I'm going to try to lose some edges, blend some edges together. I mean, I'm intending this to be more of a tight painting. It's not going to be super loose and expressive, not like that still life painting I did a few weeks ago, where there was a lot of lost edges. This is definitely going to be more based in realism, and not quite so impressionistic and painterly. But I do want some painterly touches, of course. I'm not going to try to fool anyone to try to make them think this is a photo, because there are definitely tricks to that as a skill. I'm not doing any of those. That's not what really excites me about artwork, is making it look photographic. I like realism, but I don't like photographic realism in my art. I really admire the people that can do it well, though, because it is tough. I mean, it's not just about copying the photo. You have to know a lot and be really, really skilled and make good decisions on the fly. Let's see. Antonio says, when painting is considered realistic and not when is a painting considered realistic and not stylized? What are the keys to realistic painting? I maybe don't have the best perspective on that because I don't do super hyper realistic painting. What people call hyper realism or photorealism. I mean, so much of that is in the rendering and the details where you add textures, I think, and the little flaws on the face that the camera normally picks up, but that the painter usually tries to ignore. So yeah, I think it's about textures and values, and just refined rendering, and not going for any sort of artistic interpretation, but just a totally truthful, honest portrayal of what you see in the photo. But yeah, I'm not an expert in that area. Paul asks, what specs would be important in a PC for illustration and digital painting? Looking into building one. Again, not a computer expert, but having issues with my own computer, I've looked into it myself and asked people. And generally, my friends tell me, the friends who are into building PCs, get a gaming PC is what people say, especially if you're going to be doing high resolution files and eventually video rendering. I do a lot of video editing and making now just because it just ended up growing out of my business, I guess. I don't know. I enjoy making videos. So the same specs that you need for good gaming is the same specs you need for good video processing and artwork, if you're working with high resolution files. So a multi-core processor, 32 or more gigabytes of RAM, a really strong power source that can power it all. I don't have exact specs to give you, but there are a lot of YouTube tutorials out there on gaming PCs or even video editing PCs. I think Matt Johnson is a guy on YouTube who puts a lot of videos out there. He has videos on, here's how you build a $700 PC that will work really well with video. Here's how you build a $1,500 PC. And he'll give you all of his equipment recommendations. And he makes a new video, every couple of those new videos every year to keep up to date with what's out there. Yeah, hopefully there's a couple more questions about that, but hopefully I addressed that. Okay, I'm going to move over to a different brush. It's a little more subtle. Let's see. There we go. Because I want the rendering on her face to be pretty soft and delicate. This one has a bit of still a bit of a texture on it though, which is nice because it breaks up the brush stroke, doesn't make it look so sterile, and helps the colors blend. I guess I'll zoom in on her face just a bit more. Ooh, that's too much. There we go. So I'm referring a little bit more now to the photo of the real girl around the eyes. Looks like she's actually wearing quite a bit of makeup, and I don't see Zelda wearing that much makeup, but I might want to add a little bit of that darkness around here just because it kind of creates a fun look, a little bit more mysterious eyes. Let's see. Paul asks, Court, how did caricature influence your portrait work and vice versa? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a big question. I was always into portraits before caricatures. I mean, the idea of portraits, but I got more experience early on in my career with caricature work, so that kind of dominated everything. And then a few years after I started, working and doing caricatures, I started getting a proper art education and learning how to draw portraits. So I think during my initial training at the atelier, learning head drawing and portrait drawing, I did have some bad habits from quick sketch in that I was just a little impatient, a little sloppy when I was doing my head lay-ins. But that school really taught me how to properly measure and do comparative measurement and slow down and apply a real technical process to the art of drawing, which I never had gotten before. So I think they feed off of each other, though, because I feel more confident with a portrait likeness because I have this experience with caricature. But it's important not to let the caricature instincts take over because that ends up resulting in an inaccurate portrait. So you really have to switch modes. It's hard to be in a caricature mode and go straight to portrait or vice versa. You have to really focus on just, if you want to do portraits that day, just do portraits. And if you've done caricatures for a while and haven't practiced portraits, it's going to affect you, I think. You need to get back into the rhythm, and it takes a little bit more mental discipline to do portraits. Just a lot of real subtle stuff here. It might be hard to see any progress that I'm making, but I am. I mean, you have to kind of work a little bit more subtly here. Let's see. Shiny says, is the baseline of her nose slipping down a little to the left, not quite parallel to her eyes? Oh, you know, that is a good point. It is easy to lose the drawing as you progress. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Thanks. Yeah, I was too focused on little details, and it's always good to step back and, reassess the drawing as you go, because it'll drift off the original the more that you cover up those lines. That's the real reason I had you guys here, just to help me keep my drawings on track. So I think there's a bit of a cool rim light. Yeah, I can actually see it in the original screen capture from the video game here. On the far left side, there's a bit of a cool bluish color. That might be bouncing off of her shirt, her collar, or off the ground. But that's definitely something that's going to help the realism of the painting, I think, as long as it's not too strong. It's really easy to overdo rim lighting, and it looks fancy. It looks impressive. Really helps things pop, but it's really easy to overdo. In portrait painting, it's pretty subtle, usually. Almost to the point where you may not even see it or notice it at first. I'm going to erase a few of these lines so I don't have to work so hard to paint back over them. So I'm just on the line art layer here. And I'm dimming them down, knocking them down a little bit. Especially where the hair is like really translucent against the background. Okay, let's go back up to that top layer. Yeah, thanks, Shiny. It would suck if I saw it an hour later. Ed and Eddie for the win. Okay, I'm not sure what, that's a cartoon. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Hello, Emmanuel Ba. Catalina, hi. Do you paint changing opacity of the color? No. On my brushes, I almost always keep my opacity 100%. In rare instances would I change the opacity. Maybe if I'm going for a real subtle effect, but I can usually get all that taken care of just with the pressure of my brush. And if you keep the flow set a little bit lower on your brush, like this brush is set to 40 flow, the paint won't come out, not as much paint will come out of the brush all at once. And so you can really build up colors slowly and smoothly without having to resort to a low opacity. I just don't like low opacity, it just doesn't quite give me the look that I want. Yo says, yeah, I feel there's a wide gap in brush behavior, so for rendering subtle delineations, some brushes are harder or easier to get the gradation than others, especially at 100% opacity. Okay. I'm just jumping all over the face here, going from the hair to the eyes. Just kind of wherever I see something that needs my attention. Like if I see an outline that's still, you know, sticking out, or a value that needs correcting. Okay, I think I can maybe do some highlights in the eyes now. Now she's got those big anime highlights. I'm definitely going to calm those down a little bit. And maybe just one highlight. But I'm selecting this blue color from the collar. Maybe just going just a little bit lighter. Let's see how that looks. And then this highlight's going to be maybe a little dimmer, maybe a little smaller. I always like to make one highlight a little bit more dominant than another in things like the eyes. If highlights are equal everywhere, it can look a little monotonous. Okay. Get to the point where I can, I think, pull out a little bit here, a little wider, zoom out, see how things are coming. Wait, her head. Man, did I shrink down her head? Her head looks too big. I mean, I guess it's still smaller than what it was, but yeah, I'll think about that. It's not the biggest concern I have. But let's move into the hair a little bit to try to figure out that, because hair can be pretty difficult for a lot of people. Let's see, I'm gonna get a, let's see what kind of brush this is here. Yeah, a nice little streaky brush. And she's got a particular hairstyle. If you're familiar with the game, there's this braid that goes across the top of her head, and that's gonna be kind of difficult to make up. I mean, there's not a lot of image, or not a lot of information in the reference photo of Zelda here, but I remember what it looks like. I mean, I've downloaded a few of their photos of her, but I'll try to keep it just sort of vague in general too. I don't want to draw too much attention to it. Let's see here. Ukinam says, I did this exercise before with Ed, and Eddie characters, and oh, you painted them, okay. And I learned a lot in capturing shape for my caricatures, since cartoon characters in itself are already exaggerations of people. Yeah, so yeah, this definitely can help you in your caricature work, because cartoon characters are so effective for communicating their character, because they have to be redrawn over and over again, so they have to be simple and right to the point, and you have to know immediately what kind of character it is just by looking at it. So it's definitely a different challenge than caricature art, because you're not really doing a likeness, but you're just trying to get a character type. Yeah, I think it can definitely be helpful. Anything you do in art is helpful for everything else, because there are lessons that cross over from one genre to another. I really want to capture a feeling of sort of translucentness, or translucent light shining through the hair here. But there has to be areas of darkness in order for that to read as translucent, so it still has to have areas where it's darker passages in the hair. So I'm just doing some indications of the hair, you know, the strokes, the locks, the groupings of the hair without being too precise. I'm not doing tiny brushes. I might do that at the very end when I'm done with the hair, just to have some little flyaways here and there. But I see far too many people doing hair with a tiny brush, and drawing every single little strand of hair, and it just usually looks terrible because it ends up just breaking up the forms of the hair and ends up making the person look like they got a lot of stringy, thin hair like Gollum. And the hair is usually pretty shiny too, so it might catch some more reflected light from the environment, so there might be some cooler highlights on the hair here. But not too cool, because I don't want to break the illusion, or get out of that warm color zone in general. So it's not going to be blue, but it's going to be a slightly more blue version of what's there. And just a little bit of a lighter bluish color on the forehead there, just a bit of a highlight. Hopefully it's not too much. I might be getting carried away, so when I zoom back again, I'll try to take another look at it. Shiny says, you've got a lot of the costume drawn in really well. I love how that color wraps around her neck, makes her neck look real. I always struggle with necks. Tends to be a part of the anatomy that's easy to skip. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of anatomy I'm showing here. It's just basically a cylinder, but there is I mean, the musculature is good to know when it's applicable. But I was just thinking about how clothing responds to people when they turn their head. The collar gets a little crunched up a little bit on the side that the head is turned towards. So that was definitely informing that decision there. So it's not exactly in the photo reference for the video game, but the little creases here I think help the illusion. You know, I've studied forms of drapery before. That was actually a class at the Atelier, because there is folds, and drapery does have anatomy all of its own, whether it's an active fold or a passive fold, pipe fold. You know, it depends on the forms that are underneath it. There's tension points that all the lines in the folds might point towards that tension point. So yeah, there's a lot to consider when doing that. So yeah, it's part, you know, it's not too much an anatomical knowledge here. Is it just a knowledge of folds and drapery? Well, thank you, Axel. Let's see. Hello from Bali. Thanks for joining in. Hi, Alfred. Good to see you. How do you get your subject to look like a cartoon? I just missed the start. Well, you're going to have to go back and watch the beginning. I'm working from a cartoon photo reference and trying to make her look realistic, so that's the goal of today. Herman says, I was lucky to meet Jan Optebeek on a caricature day at the Netherlands. I was surprised he is not a full-time caricature artist, but mainly a teacher. He liked you and your work. Yeah, Jan's great. I've hung out with him a bit from the various conventions I've gone to, and went to Belgium a few years ago as well and hung out with him and his family. One of the best caricature artists in the world, Jan Optebeek. And he recently retired, actually, from teaching. So now maybe he'll be able to devote more time to drawing caricatures full-time. Yeah, one of the actually there's only, yeah, I have just a few pieces of artwork in my studio. A few of them are prints. I only have 2 originals by artists that I like. They're both Jan Optebeek's. One's a picture of Jack Black, and then another one's a self-portrait. I think I showed him to you guys on the camera in a previous stream. But yeah, Jan did the best caricature of me I've ever seen. It's funny, and I think it looks just like me. I'm just going a little bit darker here with this bluish green color on the underside of the forms and the creases in the fabric. It's all within a really narrow value range, though. Don't want to make it too contrasty. And this is, I'm a little bit on my own on this part. You know, there's not good photo reference for this part. I just have to, this is basically off of imagination and, you know, just my knowledge about painting clothing. Bruce says the trim in her clothing looks amazing. Yeah, thanks. You know, and it's really, really simple right now, which just goes to show you it's not about details at all, trying to get a good effect on a painting. It's just about making the right decisions in the right places, and it can be as simple as you want. Of course, I do want to go a little bit more. I want to build it up more and make it more refined. But the key is just knowing where to place those values, you know, shape design, making that nice and neat. And I'll probably end on that. Yeah, we're coming down to the last few minutes here, so I always do like to end on sort of something that's a little more juicy, you know, that you could sink your eyes into. And, you know, gold filigree is always a nice place to do that little metallic effect. I think doing this just a little ridge of lighting really helps make this look like a three-dimensional feature on her outfit. Gives it some volume. Alfred says, I recently received a beautiful caricature from Jan Optebeek. I was part of a caricature Zoom. Oh, yeah. Lucky. Yeah, if anyone gets a chance to have Jan draw them, that's a treasure to have for sure. He's just so good. His stuff is so funny. And he's quick, too. I mean, he can just pump those things out. He's really bold with his exaggerations, and I could always learn lessons from him. He was one of the masters I studied in my caricature course. I did an example of a Jan Optebeek drawing and how to try to draw like him. But I think that's just in the premium version of the caricature course. Oh, and I do have a special announcement too here. When I stop painting, I'll tell you what that's about. Something a long time in coming here. Yeah, give me just one more minute here to tweak a couple things. And if I were to finish this up, spend more time on it, I might do things like I was saying before with the hair, like maybe add a few more, a little bit more detail to the hair, like these flyaways. But you have to be really, really restrained with these because it's so easy to overdo. But if I want to make it a little more naturalistic, then this is just how hair behaves. It's not going to stay put, not like in a video game or anime character. So just kind of like that. That's all you really need. And her hair is very tightly wound up here at the top, so there won't really be any flyaways at the top. But maybe on the sides of the head here, at those little sideburns hanging down. And anyway, that's I think that's about it for now. I made some pretty good progress, and I stayed pretty close, I think, on track to what my color study was doing. And I'm definitely going to finish this up because it's just a fun thing to do. If there's another artist out there, I just discovered him yesterday who does a lot of these, who does these realistic cartoon character paintings. His name is Ricardo Chucky. Someone brought him up in a thread on Facebook because some of his art looked a little questionable, but I think it was taken out of context. But if you go to his Instagram, it's pretty good stuff on there. And so my special announcement is I finally finished my new website, which I've been working on for about 4 years. So this is it. My old website was from 2002. It was really hard to update and to do, to add images to it. So I let it linger and languish, and I hadn't put any new artwork on it for a while, and it was just, the design had gotten a little muddled because I screwed it up halfway, into it. I had a friend do it, but then I tried to update it and maintain it, and I didn't do a great job. But I got a new website here, and this is the main homepage. I've got a page for my illustrations, broken down into caricature, pen and ink, and traditional. Section on commissions. About, and here's lessons. I have a convenient link to all my Proco videos on YouTube, or just is at this link right here. And a contact page and a store here. So I finally got a store up and running, so you can actually buy prints directly from me, and you can buy an unsigned or a signed version, and I'll rotate things out. These are just things I decided to highlight, these particular paintings. Pretty much any painting on my site you can request to get a print of. These are just the ones I happen to be focusing on right now because they're pretty pop culture celebrities, they're pretty popular. Here's an oil painting. Actually, this is not a print. If you want to buy an original oil, I'll occasionally put originals on here as well. So just take a look at that and let me know what you think. It's still, I just got it up like literally last night. But if you notice anything wrong with it or any kind of typos or weird things on different browsers, let me know. I haven't experimented with it and checked it out too much myself. So anyway, I'm very excited to finally have a new website out that's easy to maintain, that has an online store that makes it easy to buy prints. So yeah, let me know though if you find anything weird about that. Shiny Antonio, congrats. Thank you. Hello, Shiny. Nice website. Very clean and pretty. Yeah, I try to make it as simple as possible and not as cluttered. And I took a bunch of my old work off, just that it was too confusing. I tried to create a more focused website that just was more effective and that featured more just caricature and illustration. Anyway, that's it for this week. If you have any questions about this process, again, like anytime, just leave me a comment, any additional comments after the chat ends. Thanks again for joining me, everybody. It was real nice to see you all again virtually. And I'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.